Great big round of applause. Welcome Harry here. So he's going to be our guest designer today. He's a designer for Steuben glass, and he made a beautiful design for a glass piggy bank. And so he came in yesterday and worked with our team of glass blowers, and we did our first version of this glass pig. And what's different than the one that Harry initially designed is that the originals were quite small, right? We're talking about this big. Well, when we come into the Hot Glass Show amphitheater, we like to tend to supersize things, right? So we've kind of blown that initial scale out of the water here. This afternoon, we're going even bigger. So we're going to redo this. It's kind of fun in the last few minutes just hearing Harry and George communicate together. This is George Kennard, one of our lead gaffers here at the museum. Yeah, welcome, George. And so they were talking through this design, talking through, the nuances of the pig that was made yesterday and how he wants to change and improve the one that we're going to make today. So kind of working through that prototyping process. And so in addition to George Kennard, we have more team members up here. We've got Dane Jack, who's going to be assisting, helping to do some of that heavy lifting. Also Lauren Hunt here with their big guns, going to help move this big pig around. My name is Megan Matthey. I'm going to jump in if they need another set of hands making this pig, but mostly I'm here to chit-chat with you and explain everything that's going on. And so, again, Harry, though, he is the designer. He's like the foreman on our construction site. He's here to make sure that George, Dane, Lauren are all doing a really good job and that they're meeting his design expectations, making the pig the way he wants it created. And I think one of the fun things about working with George as a gaffer is that George likes to make big stuff. Has anyone seen the glass pumpkins that are out in the pickup truck over there? Yeah, so George is your gaffer who made the great big glass pumpkins. He's also in the Guinness Book of World Records for making the world's largest glass pumpkin. And so, you look at this little pumpkin. This was actually the first glass pumpkin I ever made. I made it a couple days ago here at the Hot Glass Show. And it's not, oh thanks, you guys. But it only weighs, a couple pounds. Like, this weighs about as much as a kitten. No big deal, right? So 2 pounds of glass right here. Well, the pumpkin that George made that put him in the Guinness Book of World Records weighed 85 pounds. So, and it was hollow, so it was a balloon form, 85 pounds of glass. He's kind of a strong guy. So it was funny listening to his conversation with Harry because they were just discussing how large we should make the pig. And Harry's saying, that's up to you. And George is like, I can make it as big as you want. Like, it seemed like a little bit of a challenge here. Harry's being, really pleasant designer to work with because sometimes the designers will say, I want it exactly this big. But he was kind of saying, George, you get to make that decision. And I feel like, beg your pardon? Oh, okay. So we're getting one version of Harry. The production team, who has to make hundreds of these piggy banks, they get a different Harry. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, he says so when they do the production line of these piggy banks, it has to be a little bit more exacting. And so when he's working with that team, he might not be as nice as he is to us here at the Hot Glass Show. But, this is a really common way to work. There's a lot of people like Harry who are amazing designers, who have beautiful, visions for what they want to see created in glass, but he's not himself a glass blower. He's not a gaffer who has the skill set to actually execute those designs. So it's very common for him to come in and work with a team of artists like George and Dane and Lauren and I and, see that vision realized. So is anyone familiar with Steuben glass? Is it okay, only a handful of hands in the air. So this was a glass factory that was located in Corning, New York for many, many years. And we're actually in the site of the factory floor. They used to have many benches and furnaces and annealing ovens and everything all set up in here. But it did close down. That factory closed a few years ago. The brand has since moved into production overseas and in private studios locally. And so what was nice for us at the museum is not only did we get to take over that space, though, we get to make this beautiful amphitheater in the old factory, is we got to absorb some of the gaffers from the Steuben factory. So Dane is actually one of the former Steuben employees. We've got quite a few others who are part of the Hot Glass Show team here at the museum who came in with that background. To give you an idea of the prestige and exquisite fanciness of Steuben glass, this beautiful lead crystal glass that was manufactured here, every U.S. president, while Steuben was open, gave Steuben glass as a gift of state. So we're talking about just absolutely flawless, exquisite works of art that were created right here in Corning. And so we do have a blueprint that Harry created. We've got it magneted to our heat shield up here. So when the gaffer is reheating the glass, they've got a really nice, great view. And so we might be able to zoom in on this heat shield and on this sheet of paper at some point, let you get a look at Harry's illustration. You can see we've got 3 different views of our pig. There's little notations about the clefts in the hooves of the pig. How the eyes are supposed to be imprinted into the head of the pig. So all those little details. And so George, he's got quite a bit of glass here, but of course it's George, so he doesn't have enough glass yet, right? So he's got what we call kind of a starter bubble. He's been letting it cool off, blowing on that with compressed air, because he's about to dip this back into our melting furnace and pick up another layer of clear molten glass. Now we have an animation that we can play for you that describes what's going on right now as he collects that glass. Inside our melting furnace, that great big hemispheric pot holds 1,000 pounds of glass at 2,120 degrees Fahrenheit. So we dip the head of the iron into that pot, turn in one direction as we lift out, and a lot like winding honey up onto a knife out of a jar, we wind up this hot liquid glass. So George is just cooling off the pipe, when we dip it into that furnace, the metal can heat up a little bit. Running the water over it's going to make it comfortable to touch. And if you look right now, you might have seen that glass kind of wiggling and flowing a little bit. But George, he is a strong man. He has amazing control over the glass on the end of that pipe. He's turning the iron slowly and carefully, and that's what keeps it centered and attached to the steel. Now I'm going to get just a little bit of glass here, not very much, maybe a little bit less than George, right? I've got about 2 tablespoons of glass on the end of my steel. But as a glass blower, if you're doing a great job, you're turning your iron, you're keeping it centered. If you don't do a good job, if you stop turning, this is the consistency of the glass that we're working with. So you can see how that just drips and runs and flows right off the end of the steel. So right now, are we all more impressed with George, right? Yeah, his glass is attached to the end of the pipe, very important. When people ask us, do you ever just wing it? Do you let the glass tell you what it wants to become? Do you make all these beautiful objects? No, the glass does not want to become a beautiful vase or a piggy bank or a dolphin or a pumpkin. It wants to be a puddle on the floor. So every single move that George makes is strategic. He's working very carefully and very specifically toward that end. George, are you going to gather again? This is it. That's good. And so, this is a lot of glass. The bubble inside that mass of glass is probably quite a bit smaller than a baseball. The curved surface of the glass actually magnifies it, so it looks larger than it is. So, my guess is that the size of the bubble inside, that's probably about like an apricot or a plum. So, a pretty small bubble of air. And then all that other mass is all solid glass. So we're going to be able to blow and stretch and inflate this glass really far from this point forward. Now, in addition to our melting furnace, we have reheating furnaces. That's where George is working right now. The reheating furnace is just a great big empty chamber of heat. It's about 2,120 or 150 degrees Fahrenheit right now. But we're going to use that piece of equipment to keep the glass at a good working consistency. All right, now a lot of shaping is going to start to happen. Anytime that either George or Dane or Lauren blows air into the pipe, the air pressure is going to take the path of least resistance, and the glass will grow and stretch wherever it's the hottest. And so George can control the shape of our bubble and eventually the shape of the pig by cooling different areas. We want what we call ice, a lot of thick glass down in the bottom of the pig. We want to have a low center of gravity. Harry's design shows that thick glass down in the bottom of the object. And so George has been touching that area of the bubble with his tools. The tools suck heat out of the glass, cool it there, and so then when they inflate or stretch the glass, it stretches everywhere else and stays thicker right there. Yeah, what's your question? Yeah, is there any danger of touching this glass with your fingers and burning? If you touch this glass with your fingers, you will be burning. That would be a bad thing. But George is like a chef in a kitchen. He can move really safely around the studio. And the nice thing about working with hot glass is that it is so hot, you feel it from several feet away. Actually, where I'm standing right now, I can feel heat from that mass of glass. Lauren's job right now, she's holding wooden boards just between George's skin and the object, just to deflect some of that heat. So it's almost impossible in a glass studio for someone to sneak up behind you with hot glass. You will feel that and do the little shuffle out of their way. So yeah, it's pretty rare that you're going to see anyone get burned. Rare, definitely rare. If you're getting burned all the time as a glass blower, you just made a bad career decision. I've had I've had 3 pretty significant burns in the last 12 months, 3 that kind of got to me and scared me a little bit. One was from my curling iron, one was from soup, and the third one was from my clothes dryer, of all things. So I think that says a lot about my ability to move safely in my work environment. I think it also says a lot about other areas of my life where I fail, but we can really learn to move safely and appropriately around this space. Now, you're probably looking at George, though, and seeing that he's got this incredibly hot object. It's probably around 14 to 1700 degrees right now, and his hand is holding on to that metal just about maybe 15 inches away. Well, all of our steel pipes and punties, they're made of stainless steel. It's a really poor conductor of heat. If you're nerdy about stainless steel, it's stainless steel 309. But again, that heat just doesn't travel very far up the length of the metal. Now, where George touches the blowpipe, it's about as close as you can comfortably touch. We want to, get close to the end of the iron because that helps you manage the weight of an object. You can see how we're shiny and then it's tarnished, right? Well, up to about that tarnish point is where it's okay to hold on. Now, the tarnished area, we call that the hospital zone. If you touch the hospital zone, you probably guess where you're going to spend your afternoon, but you maybe will do that once as a beginner and then never again. Again, really effective teacher here. All right, now common misconception about glass blowers. You might be watching, Dane sitting at the back of the bench there inflating this piece of glass, and you must think he has an amazing lung capacity. I bet you're thinking that if Dane went home tonight, finished a nice cold beverage, he could inflate a beer bottle at the end. No, if you can inflate hot glass, you're only using a pound or 2 of air pressure. So about the same amount of air pressure as blowing up a balloon, blowing out a birthday candle, less than blowing up a latex balloon. But I don't want to, diminish the superpowers of our team up here. Even if we don't have super strength lung capacity, we've got Popeye forearms. The muscles that it takes to turn that piece of glass, to keep it centered and to manage all that weight is really significant. So even when I think about, that little 2-pound pumpkin that I made, right? 2 pounds, no big deal. I could just hold that in one hand, easy. Well, I made that on the end of an 8.5-pound blowpipe. Okay, so that's like holding, a little kitten in the end of a shovel. Feels a lot heavier than, holding that little precious object close to your body. But if you're thinking about your kitten in the shovel and, you want to take good care of it, if you, spread your hands out along the handle and get a good grip, your kitten's safe, right? No, that precious object, it's 2,000 degrees. So scooting one hand back acts like the fulcrum of a lever. So it makes the further away your hand has to be from that temperature, the heavier the object feels. But if you think about having this, very heavy object now on the end of your shovel, if you push down with this hand, if you lift up with this hand, if you get your stance on, your kitten is safe, right? You have to keep it rotating, right? It keeps wanting to fall onto the floor. So suddenly, instead of having a good grip, you are using all these muscles in your fingers and your hands, all that dexterity to keep it rotating. So, what starts out feeling like a kitten suddenly feels like a big Doberman or something. It's a lot more difficult to wrangle. Okay, so we're making good progress inflating our pig. So where it's connected to the blowpipe, that's going to be the nose of the pig. So the end that's closest to us when George sits down at the bench, that's the bottom of our pig. I feel like I need to be working on my pig anatomy. But the snout of the pig, Another kind of fun aspect of this design that we haven't tackled yet with this little one is the stopper. So part of Harry's design is kind of a a little round glass stopper with a little plug that fits right inside the nose, and it's got two little nostrils pressed into the surface there. So that's going to be a fun little finishing touch for the snout. Now this tool that George is using, it's a really great way for him to wrap his hand around the piece of glass. He's really applying pressure with different parts of his fingertips with his palm. Does anyone know what that tool is made of? You guys have seen demos today, haven't you? Yeah, so I heard it, you said newspaper, but not just any newspaper, right? Do you know what newspaper? The Corning Leader, the local newspaper. Yeah, I've actually never read a Corning Leader. I'm from Ohio, but I've burned many of them. But we take about 7 or 8 sheets. So this one's still got a crossword on the back. Typically we put fun things on the back of the paper in like the political section on the side that we burn. But yeah, so you can soak this in water, and this is as close as you can get to touching hot glass with your hand. But all that steam and heat from this tool is rising, so it's moving away from your skin. There's a principle called the Leidenfrost effect. If you've ever dripped a bead of water in a super hot skillet and just watched how it dances around instead of immediately evaporating, well, when water comes in contact with a surface that's way over that boiling temperature, a barrier of steam is created. So in your skillet, your bead of water is dancing on steam. And when we use this tool, the glass is gliding on a little pocket of steam. And so if you start to smell smoke, then you know it's time to just get your tool wet again. But most of what you're seeing rise off of this tool is just steam. So newspaper pad, it'll last us about a week up here if we keep it nice and moist. And it looks like we've started to change our pig around. We've gone from something that has perfect radial symmetry, and we're starting to kind of squish in the torso of the pig. Sure, right? So often in the afternoons here, today is different because Harry is our guest and we're making a piggy bank. But often in the afternoons, we have a show where we make marine invertebrates. Did anyone get to go and see the show called Fragile Legacy today? Yeah, quite a few of you. So that's a show with a lot of beautiful, intricate little sculptures of marine life that were made by a father and son team, Leopold and Rudolf Blaschka. And so, we like to do these inspired by Blaschka glass shows, and we have to make different octopus and jellyfish and sea anemones and dolphins and fish and all kinds of things. I have to say I'm probably better at pig body parts than, some of these like cephalopods and things like that, but we get creative. All right, so George and Harry are kind of talking through the shape of the bottom of our pig, and so we want this to curve down a little bit further. We want to kind of let the tip of that bubble fall off center. And so rather than, kind of pushing it with any tools, what George is talking to Harry about doing is heating up the tip of the bubble and then just letting gravity pull it downward. Gravity, let it drape and fall into the curve that they're looking for. So there's a couple things that are that really impress me about this design and the execution of this piece of glass. When I was learning to blow glass, my instructor told me that you can tell a lot about the skill of a glassmaker when you see how much shaping they can do without using tools. What can they do with heat, with centrifugal force, the rate that you're turning? What can they accomplish with gravity and air pressure? So I think we're going to see a lot of really elegant shaping of the glass, just by using those principles of physics. Another thing that I think is exquisite about this design is that, my instructor would tell us that if you see a beautiful piece of glass that has no color in it, you're looking at, really excellent design. Because, glass color, it's fun, right? You're looking at all these colorful objects. They look like candy. It just adds this beautiful luster and shine and juiciness to all of these things. We love it. But if you can see something that's equally exquisite made only in clear glass, not using that kind of easy way out, right? That you're looking at something that was beautifully designed and beautifully crafted. So the Steuben glass factory, everything that they made in the kind of later tenure of that design studio was all clear glass. And it was a type of glass called lead crystal. Has anyone heard of lead crystal before? Is anyone confused about what lead crystal is? What's the difference? Well, it's a slightly different formula of glass. What we're melting here, it's called soda lime glass. The main ingredient is silica. To lower the melting temperature and give it the ideal viscosity or kind of temperatures for glass blowing, they add soda ash. And then to stabilize it, they add lime. So we use soda lime glass. Lead crystal glass, as a flux, they add lead to it. And so that changes the way that light travels through this glass. It's kind of got a more brilliant shine. It's physically heavier, so as you're working with it, that's kind of a different consistency, a different way to work. It stays hotter longer. And if you were to make two objects that were identical and set them side by side, one is soda lime glass and one is lead crystal glass, the soda lime glass might appear to have a slightly yellow cast to it. So it's just not as refined silica the soda lime is not as refined silica as the lead crystal glass. But Steuben only used lead crystal, so absolutely beautiful. Another big difference between the two types of glass is that the lead crystal is softer, and so if you cut facets, the etched glass, all the beautiful designs that can be cut into the glass, well, you can bring lead crystal to a polish using acid. So after all the cuts are made, it can be polished absolutely brilliant, very efficiently using acid. If you tried to do the same thing with lead crystal or with soda lime glass, you wouldn't have that kind of ease in your step. You'd have to go in and physically polish all of the facets. Now, another kind of thing that people start to wonder about as we begin talking about lead crystal is lead poisoning, right? It kind of makes you uneasy. You might be thinking about a beautiful set of goblets or beautiful punch bowl that you get out at the holidays. You serve everyone you love with this lead crystal glass. You're thinking, am I slowly poisoning everyone that I love? Don't worry, you're not. So one of the things that is great about glass is that it's very inert. It is stable, and any metals that are either used, like lead to give brilliance to the glass, or any of the heavy metal oxides that create color in the glass, they are not leaching out of the glass itself. So you would die of alcohol poisoning about 700 years before you could ever possibly die of heavy metal poisoning. All right, now we've really started to change the symmetry of our piece. You can see we've started to make the curve in the back of our pig. And I think it is really challenging. If you are a vessel maker like George, he made these great big beautiful bowls, and you're used to that radial symmetry, that even distribution of weight all the way around the walls of your bubble. When you switch gears and start to make a sculpture, it feels like you're driving with a flat tire. As you're turning that blowpipe, the weight doesn't, fall quite as nicely. It just takes a kind of another style of movement and a different way to interact with that piece of glass. The way that glass blowers have to move in the studio, we describe it as needing muscle memory. But, you have to be able to do all of the thinking, all of the turning and keeping of the glass centered, all of the movement with your pipe. You have to do that without thinking about it so that your brain and your attention can be directed at what steps are coming up, how are you going to change the shape, how are you going to tool the glass. The actual movement of the glass has to happen independent of that line of thought. And it comes down to experience. You just have to practice that, practice that, practice that. The first assignment I had in college, my instructor said, go home tonight, put down your other art projects, maybe sit on the couch for a couple hours, put a movie on, but while you're sitting on the couch, hold a broom handle and just practice turning it. That just needs to be second nature. You need to be able to turn the iron continuously, never pause, otherwise that's a moment when your glass will fall off center. And it works. If you were to take any of these glass blowers out to dinner, they'd probably pick up their cutlery and start rotating it, right? If you took George out to play billiards, he'd be turning his pool cue. Even if he's mopping the floor, he'll be rotating that mop. We just do that without thinking about it. And this is pretty fun. He's making some marks on the kind of rump of our pig, and he's using chalk to do that. So that's just a little piece of chalk. I'm sure you're all familiar with the piece of chalk that breaks and breaks and is only half an inch long. You're used to kind of writing on the chalkboard with it. Well, our chalkboard, or in this situation, our glass, it's way over 1,000 degrees. So we have a fancy little chalk holder that allows George to make marks on the surface of the glass and not have to have his fingertips so close they would get burned. And chalk is a really great tool because you can write on the glass while it's still hot and it's not going to leave marks behind. You can just wipe it off very easily when it's at room temperature. I love getting to work at the museum here, and coming into this studio in particular, it's like walking into Disneyland because of the fanciness of all of our equipment, the quality and ongoing maintenance that happens to all of our tools here. The fact that any tool you can imagine, they have it here in pristine condition and ready and waiting for you. That's such a luxury and such a treat. And I don't know how many times I've had to make marks on my glass with a piece of chalk and done the terrible dance because it hurts, it burns your fingers. But what he's doing is just deciding where he wants to stick and attach the legs, the hind legs of our pig. Yesterday, I described them as the legs and arms of the pig. I'm going to try and separate that, thinking we have hind legs and front legs, or forelegs, front legs. All right. So really, again, helpful when you're making a great big object like this to have an assistant who can take the heats for you. So Dane is doing the heavy lifting, taking this piece of glass back and forth from the furnace. And over the last several minutes, we haven't seen a lot of change in the shape, right? We're not inflating it further. We haven't been moving or stretching it. We've mostly been looking at it and making marks on it. Well, even though we're not trying to change the shape, we still have to flash that piece of glass inside the oven. If we let it cool down too much, it's going to be bad. That glass, if it cools down in this ambient temperature, if it dips below about 1,000-degree threshold, it can crack and break from thermal shock. It would have cooled down too quickly. What happens is that as our glass cools down, it shrinks. Now, we can't see the shrink happening, but it's happening on a molecular level. And if it's happening quickly, the very outside layer of molecules, the skin on that glass, that's going to cool and shrink. In the meantime, the thick parts of that glass wall, the inside of the glass wall, still really hot, not moving, and so the glass just tears itself apart. So anytime we make something up here, we have to anneal the glass. It's a slow cool down process. It takes about 12 hours for a piece of glass like these to reach room temperature. This pig, where we have these really kind of thick legs that are going to be made of solid glass, probably means that we should cool it down over about 16 hours. The thicker your piece of glass, the longer you want it to anneal, so that the inside temperature and the outside temperature are always in sync, always matching and shrinking at the same rate. Now, we have an enormous piece of glass in our innovation center. So if you got a chance to visit it, or if you haven't, it's kind of across the way at the top of the amphitheater. You turn left up a big ramp that takes you into the innovation gallery for glass. And there we have something called it's a Mount Palomar telescope lens. We don't have the lens from the actual telescope. What we have is the first draft. And so this is an enormous piece of cast glass. It's several feet in diameter, so probably about as far from me to Harry is about how wide this piece of glass. It's several feet thick, and so a piece of glass that big, that thick, it had to cool down for 11 months. That way the outside layer of glass and the inside would cool and shrink at the same rate. The reason we have the first draft is because the first time they did it, it cracked. So we have the first try. And I don't know that they necessarily had to cool it longer the second time that they made it. I think they just made adjustments in kind of the steps that the glass, it would come down in temperature, hold it, come down in temperature, hold. And so they probably just made adjustments within that 11-month period of time to get it just right. All right, so we have a pig leg, right? You can see that Dane has carefully sculpted and created a pig leg. No, what it looks like is he's got a teardrop of glass on the end of his steel rod. But believe it or not, that's all it's going to take. He's kind of carefully shaped that and cooled that. He's going to present it to George. And then George is going to drape it right over the kind of rump and bottom of the pig, cut it free from Dane's steel, and we'll end up with a little leg for it to sit on. I think one of the things we love about this design is the way that the pig is situated. between its bottom and its two hind legs, it functions like a little tripod. It just sits on those 3 points. All right, so here we go. Leg number 1. And so when George gives the signal, they drip that, let it stick down, and you can see the glass moving and flowing. It's reacting with gravity, absolutely. And so even George, as he sticks that down, they're rotating it back and forth, that if he only held it downhill, the leg would really start to lengthen as it fell with gravity. If he held it straight up in the air, then it would start to shorten. And so this quick movement of the leg back and forth is helping him to kind of maintain the integrity of the shape he wants. So he's using a pretty fancy sculpting tool. Does anybody speak Italian out here today? We borrow a lot of our terminology and tool names from the Italians, but perfect. So this is called a taglio. It's a great sculpting tool. It's got different kind of curves and corners on it. It's a pretty fancy way to squish the glass around. And in Italian, I'm pretty sure that taglio means $300 spatula, but you're going to find one on every bench. Another tool that George has over there is actually a butter knife. He's got a little dinner knife. And so if you ever, again, take a glass blower out to dinner, not only do they rotate their cutlery when they pick it up, but they start to look at their dinner knives and turn it over, inspect the curve, feel the weight of the handle, and decide if that would be a good glass shaping tool. All right, so working pretty efficiently to shape that leg. He wanted to shape it using the heat that came from that gather that Dane presented. So if they waited too long, if that glass got too cold, in order for George to reshape this leg, he'd have to heat up that whole back end of the pig. It'd be really hard to selectively only heat the leg. So he doesn't have a lot of time to get that done. You want to work as efficiently as possible. Another motivation that we have for working efficiently, can you feel the heat when we open these furnace doors? Yeah, so can poor Dane, so can poor George. We do not want to spend 3 hours making a great big pig. We want to get it done in as few heats as possible. Now, where the nose of the pig is attached to our blowpipe, that is the last section to go into the reheating oven. It's the first section to come out. And so all on its own, that section of our sculpture wants to be quite a bit colder. And when it's colder, that means it's in the precarious zone where it might want to crack and break. And so to make sure we've got a more even distribution of heat from top to bottom, we can torch the nose of the pig while we're sitting at the bench, give it a little bit of extra love and temperature. Then we go to flash the glass. We're pretty safe here. Are you guys loving this view that we have inside our reheating furnace? Pretty special, right? So as far as I know, the Corning Museum of Glass hot shops are the only place where you get that awesome view. And it's not an easy view to come by. There is no GoPro that sits inside a 2,000-degree furnace. There's no amount of money we could pay a cameraman to hang out in there. So what we did was we used some glass technology to solve the problem. The camera is made of, the camera, it's normal. It's got its own little fan sitting mounted to it that keeps it cool, keeps it down in temperature, but it's looking through a window. And so that window is made of a type of glass called fused silica. It's a technology that was developed right here in Corning, New York by Corning Incorporated. Back in the 1920s or 30s, they were trying to replicate quartz. And so they came up with this type of glass. It melts around 4,000 degrees. So fused silica is a pretty high temperature there. And there was no application for it, though. At that point, there weren't hot glass shows. So this fused silica invention sat on the shelf for many decades. But then NASA came along, and NASA said, we need windows for all of our spacecraft. They need to be able to withstand the heat of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And so all the astronauts look through a fused silica window. We're looking through a fused silica window. I'm not saying we're, astronauts, but we're up there. Kind of a big deal. So I get nervous, though. So right before the show, we were actually all working together to replace one of these little lenses, one of these little windows. that it had cracked. And it wasn't the fused silica window. There's fused silica and then another window that's kind of similar to this, made of soda lime glass as an extra buffer in front of the camera. Well, the soda lime glass window had cracked. But we always get a little nervous and a little jumpy when we have to, work around that little tiny window, because this, 2-inch by 3-inch piece of glass, about half an inch thick, costs about $600. So I'm more scared handling that than I would be to, pick up George's blowpipe and move around with the pig. All right, so we've got leg number 2. Dane has shaped it, contoured it, cooled it. And this is a lot of pressure now, because we don't want to make Nemo the piggy bank, right? Is anyone familiar with Nemo? He's a little fish in a cartoon, but Nemo has one regular-sized fin and one little fin, right? So often when you are making glass sculptures, you might accidentally make a Nemo fish, where one normal-sized fin, one that's too small. You might make a pig that's got one big, beefy, right leg and then a wimpy left leg. And so the pressure is going to be on George to make a matching leg on her pig. Pressure is also on Dane, because Dane has to gather the same amount of glass, shape it the same way, cool it the exact same amount, so that when he presents it to George, George can duplicate all of his movements, and we end up with that symmetry we're looking for. But it's a moving target. This glass, it moves, it flows, it's dripping away from the steel. Even the way George cuts it free, he has to eyeball, where to cut the glass to make sure it's the right length. All right, and there we go again with that taglio. Again, as soon as you start touching the glass with any of these metal tools, they are sucking heat very rapidly out of the material. And we can see the glow change, right? You can see the color change in the glass. Gives you a good indicator of how quickly that's cooling off. Now George, though, anytime he's reheating the glass, he's not looking at the color to tell him about the temperature. What George is looking for is the movement in the material. As even Dane, as he takes this glass up to the reheating furnace, we might be able to see the back legs wiggle a little bit. We might have seen the bubble start to move around a little bit as it got hotter and softer. But before we can ever see that glass move, Dane feels the weight start to shift. It feels like a little bit of drag as he's turning. You feel that little nuance in the way that glass handles, and that's how you know how hot it is. So again, just making these little micro adjustments to make this second leg and make it match. Now, there's not much in your life that can prepare you for working with glass. But George, he started out of high school. He applied for a job, and he thought he was applying for a job where maybe he was going to be replacing windows, some kind of classified ad. They need someone who can work with glass. And so George applied for this job. No idea what he was getting into, and it turned out to be, a manufacturing job working with blown glass. And so that was the start for him, and that was about 25 years ago. So, we're talking about a lot of practice. And glass blowing is just a lifelong learning process. It's really exciting. That way, every day that you go into work, you're going to be better than the day before. And the way it works out, some of the best glass blowers in the world, they are all 70 and 80-year-old men. And there's nothing that happens to, men once they pass the age of 69 that suddenly it clicks and they, get this magical glass blowing ability. But these men that I'm talking about, they are all, for the most part, from the island of Murano in Italy. And they started blowing glass when they were probably, between 5 and 10 years old. And so what makes them special is all of those decades of experience. Now, 60 or 70 years ago, girls weren't blowing glass. So I expect that to change, I hope that by the time I'm a 80-year-old lady, I'm going to be pretty amazing at this. But right now, I've only been blowing glass about 12 years, and I think I've got a ways to go. So, all right. Did you guys see how we just snipped a little bit of that pig leg? Yeah, so we wanted to shorten it, make it match the other one. So he went in with a pair of shears that are called diamond shears. And The shears that we use to cut glass, there's not special diamonds in the blades that help bite through it or anything. The reason they're called diamond shears is because of the shape. You see how these blades are bent? And when I squeeze them shut, this makes a little diamond-shaped aperture. And so that way, when we cut the glass, we can cut and squeeze it to a nice blunt point. We also have straight shears, and so we can go in and we can cut right through the glass with this tool. But using this would mean that when we cut the glass, the cold steel tool leaves a cut mark. And so this would leave a little straight line in the foot of our pig. Instead, he wanted it nice and round, so he went for the diamond shears. So different tools for our different applications. Our tools are specially forged for glass blowing, but you can cut through glass with tin snips. I have a pair of bone-sized shears for gardening that I also have in my glass kit. What's special is this little extra bit of space between the handle and the 2,000 degree glass, right? Just a little bit of buffer room to keep your hand a little bit more comfortable. What makes it tricky is that it's harder to open them because there's this extra space here, and so you kind of have to learn to really spread your fingers out to get those shears open nice and wide, especially with a tool like the diamond shears, because if I'm just cutting it like ordinary shears, you can't open it the way that far enough to actually grab around the glass. You really have to be able to kind of extend your whole hand to open that up. So I think that was one of the tricky things about learning how to use these. Does anybody sew or quilt in here? A couple people. So if you are someone who sews, you might know about nice sewing shears, right? You might be very precious with your sewing shears. You only cut fabric with your sewing shears. You hide them. You lock them up from your children and your family members. You are not to cut anything other than fabric with these beautiful, exquisite shears. Well, we actually have a beautiful pair of sewing shears that they use in the hot shop, and I just want to pull my hair out all the time because they're for fabric, but no, they also cut right through glass. We do get pretty precious about our tools. I say that as George throws tools on the floor. But the glass blowing tools, because they're specially made, our tools are handmade. There's not enough demand in the universe to necessitate a giant glass tool making factory. And so if you take good care of them, they'll last you a lifetime. So as a glass maker, you quickly learn that this can be a very expensive hobby. It can be a very low-income career. And so if you're going to stick with this, if you are wanting to make glass blowing your life, you're often adding up the numbers and figuring out how you can make that work. And when I was in college, I actually went to school for painting. That was my major and my first love. But what sucked me into the glass world was all this color, right? And so our colors, made with different metal oxides, they're pricey. My favorite color in glass is pink, of course. Who loves pink glass? We have expensive taste. If you want to make glass turn pink, they add gold chloride to it. So when I buy my pink glass to add to my vases and goblets and ornaments, it follows the price of gold. You can spend $80 on a little kilo of glass color. Who loves green glass? Yeah, cheap taste. You need iron oxide to make it green, so you can take the rust off a pickup truck, throw it in your furnace, and suddenly everything turns green. But a kilo of green glass can maybe cost you $20 or $30 as a comparison. So, but when I would have a little bit of extra spending money as a poor art student and recently graduated glass blower, I would want to spend my money on color, and so it was actually many years before I started buying my own tools, when I had a big enough budget that could accommodate my color needs and my own glass tools. But I felt pretty grown up when I reached that point that I bought my own pair of jacks, my own set of shears and tweezers. All right, so polishing the tip of these hooves with the torch. Making sure that if there is any cut mark left behind from those diamond shears, we want it to be blunt and round. And eventually, George is going to make the little cleft in the hoof. And so probably do that just the same way. Heat it with the torch and then go in with the taglio or even that butter knife and make a little cleft. Just so carefully pressing that in there. Nicely done. And just the little toenails on the other foot. And so Dane, this I think is going to count as his workout for the day. All these trips back and forth from the bench to the furnace, all this heavy lifting of this great big glass pig. And Lauren is actually doing, I think, one of the really exhausting jobs too, where she is standing, within about 4 feet of that reheating furnace, and she's been opening and closing the doors for Dane. And so that's just a really hot, uncomfortable, tiring maneuver to do, but really important. Hot glass wants to stick to other things that are hot. The doors of our furnace, they're 2,000 degrees from that roaring flame inside. If we were to accidentally touch the body of the pig against those doors, one of two terrible things would happen, depending on the temperature of your glass. About at this temperature, if we touched the side of the door, when it came away, it would pull little crumbs of brick into the piece of glass. They'd be like sharp little white brick crumbs. Terrible. Great way to ruin your piece of glass. If you touch the glass into the side of the furnace when it's at a much higher temperature, it can kind of pull and goober like chewing gum, right? Very technical terms that I'm coming up with for you, but you get the idea, right? It'll stick and stretch, and similarly just ruin your entire process up to that point. So making sure that you've got good clearance every time you go in and out of that furnace is really important, and quite a bit trickier when you have these appendages, these pig legs that stick away from the body. So Dane has gathered even more glass. I'm guessing we're about to do not the arms, but the front legs of our pig, right? And one of the adjustments that Harry decided he wanted to make when he was looking at the pig that we made the other morning is he wants to make the arms a little bit, the front legs of our pig a little bit shorter. And so it's a little bit of a change and a really great part of doing this process many times. The hardest thing to make in glass is always going to be something that you've never made before. The first time you try something, you learn a lot. The next time you do it, you're going to do a lot better. I tend to, relate everything back to painting. That's, again, kind of my primary language. But glass blowing, it's a lot more like performing a dance than it is like creating a painting. So I'm not going to dance for you, so you should all feel glad about that. But, if I were doing a dance for you and I made a mistake, I can't unmake it, right? That would just be part of our experience of me dancing. The mistake would exist. The best solution would be for me to think, all right, the next time I dance for you, I'm going to do a better job. I'm going to practice harder. I'm going to, make a better game plan. I'm going to, make adjustments to my movements and my body and my fitness and do a better dance. Well, same thing with glass. If, you make a mistake while you're working with hot glass, you can't unmake it. You can't erase that from, the finished piece. There's going to be trace of your mistake. There's going to be evidence of it. And so the best attitude you can have is to know, well, the next time I try and make that piece of glass, I'm going to make it better. I'm going to practice. I'm going to make adjustments to my body and my movement. And, we're going to see a better result. When I'm painting, I can work on a painting forever. I can let it completely dry and change it months later. It's, this very easy to have that be an ongoing process and a very forgiving process. Not so much with glass. Even if I were to, kind of come waltzing across the stage and knock our pig onto the floor and one of its ears breaks off, right? Well, rather than, people say, well, can you heat that back up? Can you stick the ear back on? Not really. I mean, it's way more efficient to make a whole new pig. To try and heat something up and repair it is just not reasonable. And if you do, there's still going to be not only a great chance of an even bigger disaster. It could blow up when you're trying to heat it back up. Whatever repair you do, there's going to be a lot of tool marks and evidence, and it won't ever be perfect. So here, very important step, the shaping of the pig butt, right? We're sculpting it with our cork paddle in this situation. And so cork is a great shaping tool because it's very gentle on our glass. If George were trying to do this maneuver and he were using that metal spatula, that taglio, well, that would rapidly chill the glass. He wouldn't get near the amount of shaping done because it would suck the heat out and freeze the bottom of our pig into shape. Also, metal tools can sometimes leave marks behind. If you take very hot glass and you drip it or touch it onto a very cold metal surface, it often, I think, looks like ripples in water. It just kind of makes a texture and we call them chill marks on the glass. But you don't run into that when you use the cork. The added bonus, I think, is that it makes an awesome smell. Can you guys smell the cork burning? I love that smell. There are glass blowers who either love it or hate it. But I think it's like a nice campfire smell. Now, there are smells in the hot shop that are universally despised. Believe it or not, people tolerate the smell of glass blowers pretty well. But one of the smells that everybody hates is the smell of burning tennis shoe. Sometimes you see us snip these little pieces of glass and they bounce across the floor. Well, they're still around 1,000 degrees when they hit the ground. And, if you step on it within about 5 minutes, it burns your sneaker. And so we're all very familiar with that. And, you'll often hear in the hot shop, who stepped on glass? Because everybody knows it and, everyone's looking around to see who did it. Another smell that I really don't care for is the smell of burning ponytail in the hot shop. So I've been in the habit lately of really winding this hair up. My hair is about down to my waist. Even that torch that George is working with right now, it sits in that cradle. My nickname for that torch is the ponytail burner because it'll get you if you're not careful. All right, so we have pig arm number 1. Just place that right on the shoulder, right where it needs to be. And Dane, wasting no time, has already gathered up the first little bit of glass for the second arm. Now, because we need so much glass to make these limbs, we have to build it up in layers. If Dane tried to collect all the glass he needed all at once, it would be so soft and floppy, it wouldn't all stay attached to the metal. He wouldn't be able to keep it under control. If you've seen someone make candles where they dip the wick into the bucket of liquid wax and let it cool between each layers, that's why we are very similar to why we have to build up our glass in layers. So now you can see Dane, he had that increased surface area, his subsequent gather, quite a bit bigger than the first one. When glass blowers are communicating with each other, we kind of have our own language to describe what we need from an assistant. So, George probably would have told Dane that I need you to do a gather and a half on a 3/4 inch iron to describe how much glass he needs Dane to collect and present to him. The size of the steel rods that we're using to collect the glass, the diameter of the head of that will influence how much you collect on the end. But another really common way that we talk about glass is different analogies. So, there's different types of glass blowers. Some love sporting good analogies, and some love fruit analogies. Candy also pops up a lot. So I've been asked to bring a pistachio of glass to the gaffer. I've been asked to bring a softball gather to a gaffer. All right, now George, he's in a little bit of a holding pattern right now. He's just adding the little nuances and details, the cleft in the hoof from our first pig arm. But mostly he's doing these flashes of heat where he wants to make sure that our little animal body stays hot enough that it doesn't crack and break, that it also doesn't overheat. If you were to spend even a few seconds too long inside that furnace, those limbs would start to move around. They'd soften. Does anybody have questions? Yeah, let me come right up here where I can hear you. What's your question? Okay. Yeah. Yes. What does a production line look like? Yeah. And so, often you are going to have teams of glass blowers set up on multiple benches. And so if you have a goal to make 200 pigs, this week, you're not going to have just one person like George, making that from start to finish. What will probably happen is you have a team that just maybe starts the bubble. They gather the initial glass, they do the initial shaping. When this goes into production, we're going to be at a much smaller scale. And so it's going to move along a lot more quickly. But it'll kind of go through assembly line stages where the first person is all the same steps. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. There's no machines that come into play for an object like this. When we're talking about Steuben glass, it is handcrafted glass. Now, a lot of the glass that you can buy is machine made, and so there are machines that will drip liquid glass out of a melting furnace directly into a mold. Compressed air will inflate it into that mold. It'll whip through this process. That's how your light bulbs, your beer bottles, and even a lot of tableware is made. And then after the fact, it is cut and polished. So they don't go through this finishing stage where we remove it from a blowpipe and flip it over. Yeah, so the question is, are there jigs and things that are going to help to make sure that the legs are positioned quickly? Mostly it's going to come down to the repetition of the gaffer, doing that move again and again. Now, when you go into production on an object, you might start making specialized tools, but I wouldn't say that that's necessary for a pig like this. Now this morning, though, we had a really interesting demonstration where Dane actually recreated a Frederick Carter design. So Frederick Carter was a Steuben designer who made an exquisite kind of Art Deco style of vase in the 1920s or 30s. And what was distinctive about this vase is it was made of these 5 triangular flutes. They look like triangle-shaped champagne flutes. They were all kind of presented out of a pedestal. And so we had to make this tool. This is it's called a fin mold. It would get inserted inside that flute shape to triangulate it. And that way he could really efficiently, create that matching shape again and again. And so, it was still a lot of work and precision. It was still a lot of the typical bench tools that you're going to see. But if you're going into production, you can get those specialized tools made. Let me grab the vase that I'm talking about. We have one of our practice vases that we made. The one from this morning's demo is still cooling down, but I think this is one that we made yesterday or the day before. And so again, this is a piece of glass that was made by Steuben. It was in production. They made a line of these, and so they probably had a team who were just making the flutes. And so they would make the flutes, they would put them away inside an oven where they stayed warm, and probably another team of artists who would take them and assemble them into the finished product. But there's definitely different configurations depending on the product that you're making. What's going to be the most efficient way to get that done. Yeah, what's your question? Beg your pardon? Will George go to the production facility to train them? No. So this glass, do you want to talk a little bit about the production of this glass that's going on? I can grab you a headset. And so we're going to turn you over to Harry, who is our designer. This is Harry Allen. And so he's working with a team to have this beautiful Steuben design produced. So it just sits over your ears.
Hi, can you hear me? So the original pig was designed, I think, 2010 for Steuben, and it was in production for a year before they stopped producing, and then now they've brought a lot of the product design, the products back from Steuben just in the last year, very quietly, and then so that's available for sale in the store now and online through Steuben.com. But they've just been, the museum is actually producing the product again, and some of it is made in Portugal, and then some of it is done here in town. And so I had done 2 products for them during that period. One was this piggy bank, which was in production for just a short while, for about a year. So actually, I never saw it made, and we have drawings of it, and there's a few of them around, but there's not a lot of them or a lot of documentation. So they asked me to come up this week and work with the glass blower that's going to be producing that piece. So yesterday we did that. We went out to his facility, and I worked with him because we're looking at, like I said, we're looking at drawings, and I never saw it made before. I just was handed the pig at the end, the end of the process. So, and it's an opportunity to sort of look at it again, and it's going to be made by a different person and sort of slightly different production techniques. So we're just looking at how to get that up and running again. But that's a very different thing. He'll make many of those pieces, so it needs to be, engineered and worked out for him to make them. But then we thought, while I was up here, that maybe we'll make a couple of, showcase pieces. This is much larger than the original piece. The original piece is about, this big. And so that's where we're at with it. And I'm learning also as we go along. And everyone keeps looking at me like, is this the way it's supposed to look? And I'm not really sure, because it's been a while since I did it. And the drawings are, like we have a drawing on the wall over there that was done by the Steuben team. I'm sure I did some sketches. We worked together to build some clay models of it. And I have photographs of all that stuff. And actually, my mother has one of the banks. But like I said, they're scarce. We don't have a lot of them for reference. So yesterday I called my mother and I asked her if I could get my hands on her piggy bank so we can look at that one. And there's some things, like I always thought the front legs were too long on the original one, like that pig could never walk, so now we're, and even yesterday we did it to the drawings, and I thought, oh, those legs are too long, so we're shortening them up. Oh, such a critical maneuver. But I'm a pretty contemporary designer. I design a lot of furniture and lighting, and I designed a piggy bank that actually is for sale downtown. I just saw it. It's in Pure Design down on the main drag in town. And that piggy bank is cast from real life. I actually cast a real pig, and I made this piggy bank out of it. It's made out of resin. It's a completely different thing. And I'm pretty well known for that. It's a whole product line. The entire product line is cast from real life. There are wall hooks that are cast from my hands, and fruit bowls that are cast from fruit, and it's this very literal product line. So I walked into the meeting at Steuben, this is way back when, and the art director, creative director, was like, I have a great idea. I want you to design a piggy bank for us. And I was sort of like, I already have designed this piggy bank that's very well known. Like, here we go again. But that happens a lot in the design industry, that you have one success and then people ask you for it again. So but then I thought about it, and actually I thought it was a great product for Steuben to make, and it was something that they had never made because Steuben was so well known for its animals and all of its little caricatures. So once I got over the initial, dismay over the brief, I thought, oh, it's a good thing to do, and maybe I should just sort of embrace that Steuben glass-blowing aesthetic, that they had going with all of the hand coolers. They did a whole line of little animals that were just these little sculptural objects, and so I put my mind to this piggy bank, and I thought that it would be interesting if really it was just a jar. I mean, you can see the body is just a bottle with a bunch of dabs and globs that go on it that turn it into a pig. So that was the original concept behind it, and now I've sort of fallen in love with it. So I'm happy that it's coming back again. And then the second piece that I designed for them was a piece that's being made in Portugal at the moment, and it was never offered for sale. Like I said, because this was done by hand in this factory. They made a few of them before they folded, but then the change dish, or it's a jar, it's a coin jar that has all these words written on the side as it fills up with coins. It goes from penniless to filthy rich at the top of it, and has a big stopper on the top of it. And that's actually just offered for sale again, and they have them in the store if you want to take a look at them and buy them, of course. They're for sale there. Is that all right? A little bit of the history.
Yeah, big thank you to Harry. That's really great information and more of that history of Steuben. So we've seen some big changes, right? Well, Harry was chit-chatting. We flipped the pig over. We went through something called a punty transfer, where they attached another steel rod onto the bottom of the pig. We broke the pig free from the pipe. And so now where that little snout was, that was a hard, sharp edge of glass, but now they've been concentrating all the heat in that area. You know, where the glass breaks from the pipe, it's often a little bit thick, and it can break a little bit unevenly. So we want to go in and address that. So George started to tweeze the opening of that snout, pulling and stretching and elongating that little bit of glass. Now, the tweezer marks, that's not a good thing, right? We've left all of this kind of unsightly texture around the opening there. And so what we're probably going to see George do is trim away all of that texture, all of those tool marks. Now, trimming the glass, it is not easy. He's actually picked up a special pair of shears. These ones are called duck shears. You can probably guess why. See how the blades have this little curve to them, crack, crack, right? And so when he goes to trim this glass, you've got to be so careful. Your timing has to be perfect and your heat has to be perfect. If the glass is the right temperature, it's going to feel soft and spongy like you're cutting through an orange peel. Now, if you are cutting too slowly, the glass, it's cooling down just in this ambient temperature. Also, these metal shears are sucking heat out of the glass. So anytime I go to trim, I think, Megan, you've got to be swift and decisive, because any second of hesitation can be the difference between completing your trim or getting your shears stuck in the glass. And so George, he actually dipped his hand in water before he went for this trim, goes right in, cuts right through it. Again, watching that trail of glass, making sure that doesn't swing back and bonk into his arm. Beautiful job, though. And so we've now cut away all those tool marks left behind by the tweezers. As we reintroduce that to the heat, you know, it kind of leaves a bit of a sharp line from the edge of the shears. Well, that's going to soften and fire polish all on its own. It'll kind of ball up, round out. It's going to be just visually perfect now. Yeah, what's your question? How much does this cost? The big pig. Well, I don't think that this big pig is going to be for sale, but generally what goes on anytime we make glass here in the amphitheater, we can't sell it. You know, we're a not-for-profit organization, and so you know, everything that gets made here gets given away at different raffles. It goes to different auctions for charity. It goes for different promotional events, but we don't sell the glass that's made here on the shop floor. This big pig, it's also not going to be, you know, marketed and sold. The little pigs are going to be in the production line, and they can probably tell you in the glass market what kind of cost to expect for a Steuben piggy bank. But you know, when you're looking at the labor cost that goes into making something like this, you've got George, you know, a gaffer with 25 years of experience. You've got Dane and Lauren both in with more than 10 years of experience. You know, we're running an enormous reheating furnace for a couple hours to get this piece of glass made. And so, you know, making something in glass, particularly something you've never made before, you know, this prototyping process, it's time intensive, it's labor intensive, and it's really costly, but I can't quote a price for you. Priceless, it's priceless. There you go. So another, actually, rule I should point out that, you know, as glassblowers here at the museum, anytime we make something, whether it's a pumpkin or a dolphin or a vase, you know, we can't quote a price for them. That as, you know, representatives of the museum, we can affect market value if we start spouting out values here of the pieces that are made. So, all right, look at this. We are shaping and sculpting the pig from inside the bubble. So George reached for another tool. It also has a fancy Italian name, but these are called parchofis. And so they've got these nice wooden dowel rods on the end. These ones kind of got burnt and broken, but the ones George is using have kind of burnt, rounded tips on them. And so kind of pushing and forcing and curving kind of the back of the pig's head using this tool is a really excellent way to shape it because it's so gentle. You know, doing the same move, you know, we have parchofis that are made of graphite. You know, if he did the same move with this tool, the graphite would chill the glass so quickly it would leave marks on a texture on the inside of the pig head. But in this situation, using the wood, is a really excellent choice. I think this is another good time to talk about how, the level of skill it takes to execute a beautiful object out of clear glass, because any kind of texture imperfection, that's going to be visible. That's going to change the way that light passes through our finished piggy bank. And so you'll see, if you make a mistake, if you mark the glass or you poke it in the wrong place, even on the inside, you're going to change the way the light travels through. Yeah, good question. So when they are reheating the glass inside the furnace, can they see what we can see? We have 80-inch television screens. We have an amazing view of the snout of that pig. No, they don't have that view. So it's actually pretty funny. We have glass blowing shows on cruise ships. We've got 3 different cruise ships, and in that studio, we have the same camera, and when I'm working on the ships, the monitor for the audience is right above the furnace. So as I'm reheating my glass, I get into this terrible habit of looking at the monitor while I'm reheating and getting just that different view, mostly because it's cool. It's not particularly helpful, but it's just like, oh, that's neat, just like shiny. You stare at it. And then I come back to the museum, and suddenly, we're creatures of habit. It's all about that routine and rhythm and muscle memory, and I'm reheating my glass, staring at the black wall. And then I wonder, why am I doing this? But, oh, I need to look at the glass. I'm so used to just looking above the furnace when I go to reheat. But yeah, so Dane does not have that view when he's reheating. And but believe it or not, Dane doesn't necessarily have to stare into that furnace or look at the pig to know the temperature. Because it's about the movement, as he's reheating it, you feel when it gets hot, because you feel it start to shift around a little bit. It's probably never a good idea to completely, stare off into space, but if you're making your 200th matching vase, you probably can. You can probably get away with that. You have such a rhythm and routine and timing and understanding of the glass that you can do that. Good question. Yeah, what's your question? What year did Steuben stop working in this shop? 2011. So, yes, so Steuben glass is still being produced, but not here in the museum or not in this amphitheater space. It's being produced overseas in Portugal and then locally at small private studios. Yeah, so when the factory closed, Corning, they retained the naming or the rights to the name Steuben Glass, and the museum is kind of being charged with being stewards of the brand, and so the brand still maintains that same integrity, but the production just isn't happening in this factory. Absolutely, yes. So the glass that's being produced, it is to Steuben standards. We still have teams that manage the quality control and production of Steuben glass. They were working in the factory when it was here, and now they work in those other locations with the teams of artists making the glass. Good question. There are other questions out here while I'm out where I can chit chat with you. Yeah. Yes. I keep referring to George as the gaffer. What does that mean? Well, the term gaffer, it's an old factory term, and even older than that, it's the Old English word for grandfather. Now, George is not a grandfather, but it kind of refers to the person who's going to have the most experience and seniority on the shop floor. And so, it's typical on your glass team that you've got the gaffer and then the slew of assistants to help present different bits to them and do their bidding. I think one of the best parts, though, about being part of the team here at the Corning Museum of Glass is that we get to take turns being the gaffer. So sometimes it's George, sometimes it's Dane, sometimes it's Lauren, sometimes it's me. But we all have to kind of rotate through and take turns narrating and assisting each other and then making work. So, yeah. So the Steuben factory, though, they were kind of famous for having a 6-year apprenticeship program. So when you were first hired there, if you came in without glassblowing experience, it would take you about 6 years to reach that level where you could, work your way from being a gatherer, someone who just collects that glass out of a furnace, to a presenter, someone who's going to shape and serve it to the gaffer, and then the gaffer themselves. All right, things are getting so much cuter when you start to add the face, right? So we've added eyes onto our pig. And so George did that by heating a couple of spots very carefully with one of our torches and then going in with a brass tool that kind of had a little tube texture to it so they could make the eyes. And that's one of the design notations on the blueprint that we have from Harry, is that the eyes are pressed into the head and they're not additive bits of glass. Yeah. Why the spout on a piggy bank? Well, I think because it's precious Steuben glass, you don't want to, put the coins in a slot and smash it, right? This is an object we want to use for generations and treasure always. So, just a different design that, it's going to have a little, so the chin, that's actually the little chin and mouth of the pig. And then the stopper that we're going to create is also made of glass, but that's nice and round, and that's kind of the nose and the nostrils. And so this kind of functions as the little lip of our pig. Yes. Here, let me check. So I feel like I've got some people listening in who might answer these questions better than I can. So anytime they want to jump in. What's your question? So yeah, where are the lottery tickets to try and win this pig? I wish that was the case, but I'm pretty sure nobody wants to take this home today because it's still going to be 1,000 degrees. So that'd kind of be an unkind gesture to finish your day here at the museum. But yeah, I'm not sure what the intention is for the finished pigs, but we're going to be doing this again tomorrow. We're going to be doing it even bigger. And so I know we definitely need this pig around for tomorrow's morning conference when we look at the pig and make design decisions and changes. Let me get you and then yeah. How do you make the even bigger pigs if you still have to keep them hot? The same way, just a little bit more sweat and effort. So this furnace that we've been heating in and out of, you see how it has concentric sets of doors? We can go bigger inside that same furnace. But part of the conversation that Harry and George were having before we started this afternoon was that, if you really want to go big tomorrow, let us know, and we'll light the jumbo hole. So that's an even bigger reheating furnace. I'm kind of hoping that they go a little bit smaller and stick with this furnace. But if we need to, we'll get our game face on and we'll go jumbo and we can light that great big oven. Yeah, absolutely. The pumpkins on the truck, they were made with a great big jumbo reheating furnace or glory hole like that one. Did I see a question right here? How do we know the pig won't wobble? Well, so the design is really clever, and if you look at the blueprint, the way it's designed is that it's tripoding between the two hind legs and the rump, the bottom of the pig. And so, like a milking stool, it's resting something on 3 points, really wise, very stable. It's probably one of the reasons he designed it so that it wouldn't stand on all four legs, because that's just, again, not as stable. Well, that's a good point. So what Harry was saying, if you couldn't hear him, he says in the production line, all of these pigs are going to get cold worked, which means they go into the shop after they are at room temperature, and they get ground flat on the bottom using a diamond plate. So you level them out that way. But you mentioned that or you can just set it down while it's still hot, and it'll just level itself right out. That could happen, or that we could strategically make different shapes like that. In fact, I made some fish that way, where I make fish in between the tail of the fish and the pectoral fins of the fish. Again, they tripod, and that way it's a fish that stands. And so usually when I make one of these, I set down a wooden board on the table, and then while it's still attached to the blowpipe, I'll kind of set it on that board, make sure that it stands up nice and straight, rests on those three. And so again, just using kind of gravity and soft glass, check my level, and then, let it stabilize and go from there. So you can do it both ways, but on a precision product like these piggy banks, do it a little bit differently. How cute are these ears? Oh, I love them. So, of course, we don't want Nemo the pig. We need still matching ears. What was it? Yeah, he's pointing out that amazingly, the one that we made yesterday, it sits by itself. And it's actually not even tripoding. It's just like perfectly distributed weight that it actually is rocking on its hind legs. It's got enough mass in the very tip of that bubble that it's just beautifully balanced. But that's actually kind of a flaw in the execution, that it wasn't, while I think it's a great success, that's true, yeah. Good point. So Tom did that yesterday, where it wasn't George who made this pig, it was another one of our gaffers, Tom, but he laid wooden boards on this table, and he did kind of sit the pig down and rock it and put it into position, and I'd forgotten about that. Kind of chit-chatting and watching the glass making, it's a bit like patting your tummy and rubbing your head at the same time. I end up losing track of things. I'm going to come back around the other side so I can hear your question. When we're running these big fluffy torches, it's really difficult to hear. All right, what's your question? Yeah, so good question. What happens to all this glass that's falling on the floor, all these little scraps of glass? Well, if it falls on the floor, or if it's glass that we've added any color to it, we consider it dirty. It's probably going to pick up impurities. And so if we were to throw that back into our melting furnace, then we wouldn't have beautiful, pristine glass to work with. But if you have, like let's say we just broke the ear off of that piggy bank and decided it's not a keeper, we can remelt that in. If it's clean glass, reload it into our furnace and recycle it. Any of the scraps of glass that hit the floor, any colored glass pieces that are broken that aren't quality that we want to share with the world, they do get recycled, just not by us. So they'll go to a recycling plant the same way your beer and wine bottles can. Often they become an aggregate in asphalt or concrete, but there's a lot of different ways you can recycle glass. Yep. Nope. So Dane has a very light touch when he's holding that iron. He presents the glass to George. George grabs onto the iron with his shears, and so George is guiding the movement. And so Dane is just like very, gently following George's movement. Yeah. So Dane's supporting all the weight of it. George certainly isn't supporting the weight of that steel, but he's very gently steering, and Dane is responding to that. So. Yeah, you kind of get mean looks as an assistant if you're kind of backseat assisting, is what I describe it as, that sometimes someone presents you a bit of glass and you're the gaffer and you're trying to, make confident and decisive movements, and you feel this resistance, and then you give your assistant the stink eye, and sometimes I feel like I have to kind of, man up and, be tough and say, don't do that, assert myself as the gaffer if your assistant's strong-arming the bits of glass they're presenting to you. What's your question?
As you get into production, it's going to get a little more.
That's a rumor. So yeah, he's saying this is pretty creative and interesting, but as you get into the production, it's got to get a little bit repetitive and boring. Oh, never. Oh, it's endlessly fascinating. Now, I think prototyping and doing this type of, look at this, like the curling of the pigtail the first time, that's so dreamy and exciting and fun. And, that's why we love working at the Hot Glass Show, because we are doing different projects all the time. We don't have to make the next, 2,000 pigs, right? Somebody has to, but, people hear about sometimes glass factories closing and they get upset or, they get disappointed. And you look at this long history of glass production, and I have to say, I'm really glad that we aren't hand-blowing beer bottles, that we aren't making light bulbs. When we approach glass making, we get to do it as artists. We get to make a lot of one-of-a-kind objects when we are working kind of within the studio craft movement. But that being said, a big order in doing these production runs for something like Steuben is still a really exquisite way to keep that level of craftsmanship alive and available to a lot of people. It's funny, so I mentioned that that's my first pumpkin that I made earlier this week. And in glassblowing, that's kind of unheard of, because most glassblowers, it's a really good kind of bread and butter thing to produce. If you make however many pumpkins you make, that's how many you can sell. You can never, have too many of them. And somehow I've made it 12 years into my glass career, never having made a pumpkin. And I'm, talking to the other gaffers, and I'm saying, this is so fun. I love making these pumpkins. And they all are just like, are you kidding me? Because these are people who have made thousands and thousands of pumpkins in their career. So, it's whatever keeps it exciting. A lot of us do produce glass, and we'll make a series of things that are very similar. It's a great way to practice skill, to build efficiency, and to amass a big quantity of work if you're trying to make a living at it. And so I think it can be really nice going into production mode. If I'm making ornaments, I might be making 20 an hour. But if with a good audio book or a good assistant that you're working with in conversation, it's really kind of zen and meditative, and you just kind of flow with it. So yeah. All right, now we are nearing the end of our process here. I can tell because Dane has his favorite outfit on. It's Friday night, right? He's got his, or Saturday night, right? Even better. He's got his big space suit on. He has Kevlar mittens and even a face shield. Because Dane's going to have the lucky job of catching this piece of glass, grabbing onto it when we break it free from the iron, and then Dane is going to load it into a 905-degree annealing oven. So it's definitely not a situation where you want to be uncomfortable and chuck the glass into the oven and shut the door as fast as you can, right? You want to be comfortable so you can set it down gently. And so this big jacket is going to protect his body from the heat. The Kevlar mittens, you can hold onto a piece of glass for maybe about 30 seconds before they really start to smoke. And even this face shield, that's going to keep Dane from getting what we call the annealer haircut, or in his case, probably be a nice shave, right? He'd lose that lovely ginger beard. So the face shield will protect him. The gloves and coat are going to protect him too. Now, George, he's holding a butter knife, that tool in his hand. He's just tapping right where it connects onto the bottom of the pig. So right in that seam between punty and pig, tap. Perfect. That's all it took. Beautiful break. The fire polish the bottom. Make sure there is no sharp spot where that comes away from the steel. And then very quick, runs that right over to the annealing oven. We've got a little blanket. It stands up. Beautiful work of art. Let's have a great big round of applause for your team. Our designer, special guest designing for Steuben, Harry Allen, George Kennard, lead gaffer, Dane Jack, and Lauren Hunt on the assists. Awesome job.